I don't think that a candidate would deserve to win a primary without the votes of black women.
Even though we were told there was no addictive potential, there was addictive potential.
I'm going to make his face a mask of blood. That's my plan.
U.S. Labor Secretary Alexander Acosta, who's facing calls for his resignation over his role as the top prosecutor in a 2007 case against Jeffrey Epstein, attempted some damage control in a press conference, defending his sign-off on a lenient plea deal with the accused underage sex trafficker.
Would you make this same agreement today?
Today's world treats victims very, very differently. Today's world does not allow some of the victim shaming that could have taken place at trial 12 years ago. We did what we did because we wanted to see Epstein go to jail.
2 days after the leak of British diplomatic cables describing the Trump administration as dysfunctional and inept, and a day after President Trump promised to ice out the ambassador, Kim Derrick is resigning, saying the current situation is making it impossible to carry out his role.
We are the most un-Trump state in America when it comes to health policy, and I'm proud of that.
California has become the first state to offer health care to low-income, undocumented immigrants aged 25 and under. The state has given children under 18 access to its Medicaid program since 2016, regardless of their immigration status, and it's estimated the new law will cover an additional 90,000 people. President Trump signed an executive order aimed at helping the 37 million Americans suffering from kidney disease. The order directs the Department of Health and Human Services to develop policies to achieve 3 goals: improving access to kidney transplants, increasing options for alternatives to treatment at dialysis centers, and preventing people from developing kidney failure in the first place. The Department of Health and Human Services gave a tour today of its new shelter for migrant kids in Carrizo Springs, Texas. We weren't allowed to bring cameras, but the Associated Press shot this footage yesterday. As watchdog organizations and whistleblowers have come out to describe horrifying conditions at shelters for immigrants held by the government, these controlled, pre-programmed tours have only become more common. HHS walks reporters and lawmakers through dining halls, classrooms, and soccer games to show how well kids are treated and how the controversy surrounding these places is overblown. Vice News reporter Gabby Del Valle was there.
I would say the tour was definitely a little sanitized, but then again, this facility has only been open for, I want to say, less than 2 weeks. When we were touring the kids' dorms in particular, I noticed a lot of drawings on their walls. Some of them were really patriotic. A lot of photos of their families that said like mom, dad, grandma, I miss you, things like that. And these kids are not kids who recently arrived at the border. They're kids who were brought in from other OR shelters. And we were told that they're close to being released. It definitely felt, very much like a guided tour. It kind of felt like we were in a zoo. So we were just gawking at these kids and they were gawking at us.
Meanwhile, at a hearing in Washington, members of the House heard a different perspective from an asylum seeker whose 19-month-old daughter died 6 weeks after they were released from ICE custody.
Me duele revivir esta experiencia y recordar lo que yo sufrí. Pero estoy aquí porque el mundo debe saber lo que está sucediendo con tantos niños en las cárceles dentro de la detención de ICE. Mi hermosa niña se ha ido ahora, pero espero que su historia estimule al gobierno de los Estados Unidos a actuar para que niños no mueran por negligencia y maltrato que dan.
Immigration and how the government cares for children are the kinds of things that Congress should be discussing. The kinds of things that should transcend politics. Well, you know what I'm going to say next. What got a lot of DC types to tune into that hearing today was the chance, however slim, to find more proof of a feud that a lot of people really want to be real. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi versus Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Since AOC was sworn in back in January, political types have waited to see if she'd lead a crusade against Pelosi. Sure, AOC started her term joining protesters inside Pelosi's office, and Pelosi's been openly skeptical of AOC's signature Green New Deal plan. But for the most part, the left and the center have gotten along. There really are starting to be fault lines inside the Democratic Party on immigration. You see them playing out every day in the presidential race. This week, Pelosi and AOC started playing those roles that pundits really want them to play. Over the weekend, a pissed-off Pelosi criticized her lefty haters in the New York Times. All these people have their public whatever and their Twitter world, she said. But they didn't have any following. They're 4 people, and that's how many votes they got. Snarky. This all escalated a couple weeks ago when the Republican-controlled Senate passed a bill to send money to the border to improve the situation for detainees. A lot of Democrats in the Senate voted for that bill. But when it got to the House, some progressives did not like it and wanted to change it. They wanted to include restrictions on ICE and other detention regulations. But they ran into a wall of moderate Democrats who wanted to pass the Senate bill and had the votes to do it. AOC and her folks in Congress criticized those moderates publicly. Pelosi took some hits too for bringing the Senate version to the floor and getting it passed.
The motion is adopted.
A source inside the House Democratic Caucus's closed-door meeting this morning said Pelosi told off those progressives to their face, saying, "Do not tweet about our members and expect us to just think that's okay." But she also joked, "We're a family, and every family has its moments." As far as inter-party battle royales go, this is a small one. But it could grow, because Democrats don't have a unified voice on immigration issues. There isn't a single comprehensive plan for all of them to fight for yet. Meanwhile, the detention centers are still running. The nightmare is still unresolved. But hey, at least we're getting that DC drama so many people have wanted for so long.
Half a million people descended on Essence Festival over the weekend to celebrate Black culture. And these days, where Black women go, so do 2020 candidates.
Black women can tell when you're lying. They can tell what you said and what you meant. So you can come with whatever game you want. You better be straight and authentic.
They're Democrats' most reliable voters. In 2016, 94% picked Hillary Clinton. The support of Black women is such a bedrock that past candidates have seemed to take it for granted. In the Trump era, that's not an option.
I have plans, real concrete plans. Plans to make our government reckon with the legacy of racism and discrimination that has systematically disempowered Black families and Black women for generations.
But for 2 of the top candidates, Senator Kamala Harris and South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, the weekend was about more than plans. It was about how their identities and their records will affect their ability to win over Black women. Harris stole the show at last month's debates, partly by invoking her experience as a young Black girl.
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
The moment raised questions about whether Harris, whose parents are Jamaican and Indian, has truly lived the African-American experience. Questions her sorority line sisters find laughable.
When you hear people ask the question, is she Black enough? What does that say to you?
Wow, that's actually a little bit disturbing because clearly she's Black enough. I mean, she made the choice to attend Howard University, a historically Black college. She represents African-American women. She pledged an African-American sorority. I think it's pretty clear. She obviously is. But I don't know if that matters as much as is she qualified enough. And she absolutely is.
Harris didn't publicly grapple with questions about her identity. Instead, she made her case to the crowd.
The fight of Black women has always been fueled and grounded in faith and in the belief of what is possible. And that's why Sojourner spoke. It's why May flew. It's why Rosa and Claudette sat. It's why Maya wrote. It's why Fanny organized. It's why Shirley ran, and why I stand here as a candidate for President of the United States.
Pete Buttigieg also worked on his pitch.
We need to invest in the future of Black America with a Douglas plan that is as ambitious as the Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II. If America could invest in other countries, we're going to have to invest in our own, in our time, and it starts now.
But he's in a different situation. He's testing his message while polling near zero among Black voters.
Have you heard anything about Mayor Pete Buttigieg?
No.
Have you heard anything about Mayor Pete Buttigieg?
A little, not much.
Do you know anything about Mayor Pete Buttigieg?
I do not.
Like literally nothing?
Literally nothing.
His debate performance may have raised his profile, but it was defined by questions about how he handled the police shooting of a young Black man in South Bend.
I could walk you through all of the things that we have done as a community, all of the steps that we took from bias training to de-escalation, but it didn't save the life of Eric Logan.
He used the Essence Fest stage to apologize again and to prove he has something tangible to offer.
It's important to accept responsibility for what needs to change. And I hope now the conversation can be a forward-looking one about racial equity in our time, because every candidate, and frankly, especially white candidates, need to find their voices on this issue.
Buttigieg knows he has a lot of work to do to make himself known and trusted among the women here.
I've heard you lament that people ask how you're going to win the Black vote rather than asking what it is that you're offering Black voters. And yet with your Douglas plan, with other plans you've come out with, there's still a disconnect. So how do you close that divide?
Well, I think it's quantity time. We can't just put a plan online and expect everybody to read it and be won over overnight. I've got to be out there explaining what it means for us to invest in minority entrepreneurship, why I believe we really can deliver a 50% reduction in incarceration in this country without an increase in crime, what it would look like to actually support equality in health outcomes that are currently holding people back, especially women of color in this country. Just because we thought up a plan isn't enough.
Can you win this primary without Black women?
I don't think that a candidate would deserve to win a primary without seeking and earning the votes of Black women. It's part of why we're here. It's part of why we're making sure it's clear how our proposals will benefit people of color.
For all of these questions of a candidate's racial solidarity, record, and policies, convincing Black women also requires acknowledging the voting bloc's complexity.
Black women, we're talking about millions and millions of people, and I think that the problem is that so many candidates pander and they think that all Black people are the same or we want all the same things. I want candidates to speak to our needs as Americans. Many of our needs are the same. So I just want to see candidates come to conventions like Essence, go to colleges, churches, and speak to people so they can hear us.
That's why I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
The professional cycling team EF is on its last practice run before the Paris-Roubaix, the toughest one-day race of the season. Since 2013, they've been racing it without the help of a powerful drug that many cyclists have depended on for years.
We really wanted to get rid of it in our team across the board during competition. To hear, athletes who have used it in the past, one of the first things they always say is, I can't imagine having to react quickly on this medication.
The drug is Tramadol, an opioid painkiller like OxyContin. And as of March, the Cycling Federation has followed EF's lead by banning it in all international races. But for years, Tramadol wasn't marketed as an opioid at all, because doctors said it wasn't addictive.
Even though we were told there was no addictive potential, there was addictive potential. We were told there was none of the real downsides of opioids, yet we were seeing these downsides in hospital settings, in clinical settings. What I see is the emergency room is part of the bigger opioid problem that we have in the United States.
Better known under the US brand name Ultram, the DEA increased its regulation of Tramadol in 2014. But its classification is so low because of its perception as a weak opioid that a prescription can be refilled multiple times.
You can imagine that, like, if you're a patient and you've just gotten your hip operated on.
In a research study published in May with her team at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Molly Jeffrey proved what sport doctors like Sprouse had suspected for years.
We wanted to compare if you get Tramadol versus if you get other short-acting opioids like hydrocodone or oxycodone, are you more or less likely to continue using? And because there's this idea that it's a weak opioid and therefore not as addictive, we had thought that we might see that people were more likely to discontinue it.
That wasn't the case.
It wasn't the case at all. People were just as likely to continue using Tramadol, if not slightly more likely.
Worse, many doctors prescribe it thinking it is less addictive than stronger drugs.
You definitely see some people, some clinicians who think it's not an opioid and therefore tell their patients, this is Tramadol and it's not an opioid. They were taught in medical school that it wasn't an opioid, and so that's what they tell their patients too.
That's what happened to Andrew. He's been in rehab for 3 months. His addiction to opioids began 9 years ago when he was prescribed Tramadol as a soldier in the US Army.
They passed out Tramadol for any number of reasons. If somebody had a sprained ankle, they would get a bottle of Tramadol and be able to keep it in their rucksack, and that it just managed to find its way through the company very quickly. It spread like wildfire.
When did you first start to notice some kind of dependence?
I noticed some level of dependence almost instantly. Made me feel comfortable with snorting an unknown white substance. And that led to, I used cocaine, I snorted methamphetamine, and that all happened within 9-10 months of me trying Tramadol in the first place.
Back on the professional cycling circuit, the Tramadol dope testing campaign is in full swing.
To put the label on, because there's no name on it, because the lab doesn't know which is the name of the athlete, and later to lab.
Qui est programmé d'ici 55 minutes. Voilà le début des hostilités, cette longue épopée qui va les mener.
So far, the cycling community is the only one to have taken a real stance against the drug.
This is a race where there would be some pressure to use a painkiller like an opioid. And within about 10 meters of being on the cobbles, you just want to be off. It's long, and then you're hit with these painful, violent sections. But I would say it's absolutely one of the hardest, if not the epitome of it.
So is he 18 seconds back? Yeah. Is that he's group 2 now?
Sprouse and others hope the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, will follow their lead.
But Gilbert is going to score for Belgium.
Other sports haven't taken this step yet. So we're definitely in the forefront, but I think there's more to be done.
Belgium, he has won Paris-Roubaix, and that for him is a major, major deal.
This is beyond history in the making. This is the first ever legal, state-sanctioned bare knuckle fighting event in Florida history. We are making noise like no other combat sport in history has.
Wanna get smacked again? Wanna get smacked again? Wanna get smacked again? Wanna get smacked again?
The Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship, or BKFC, is the latest combat sport to get licensed.
Absolutely phenomenal fight.
Its founder says it will soon compete with UFC, which became a $6 billion business by being more action-packed and violent than boxing. In their biggest move yet, BKFC have persuaded former two-time world boxing champion Paulie Malignaggi to come out of retirement and step into their ring.
Paulie the Magic Man Malignaggi.
This fight is different to a boxing match because it's obviously no gloves. It's funny because as society goes to a more PC culture, the combat sports, the thirst for combat sports becomes more violent, you know? Let's face it, bare knuckle boxing was banned 100 years ago. Now it's back.
Paulie is doing everything he can to get back in shape, reducing his oxygen intake while training to increase his endurance.
When you decided to take this fight, what did your friends and family say?
They thought, like, what, you out of your mind? When people see blood and people see broken bones, automatically, because it's visual, they think, oh my goodness, it's so dangerous.
People will say that Paulie Malignaggi comes out of retirement, takes part in a bare knuckle fight.
Yeah,
he must be like all the other boxers, he must be broke.
I hear the rumors, and it's fine. I mean, listen, if I get into my Ferrari and go for a ride and know that's my car, hey man, what do I need to convince you for? You know what I'm saying?
You know, you haven't been hit with bare knuckles, you're practicing with gloves. Like, how are you feeling as the fight gets really close now?
If I think about the fact of, oh my goodness, what is it gonna feel like? You're psyching yourself out. That's not how you approach a fight. You approach a fight understanding your plan for the fight and executing it. I'm going to make his face a mask of blood. That's my plan.
The man behind BKFC is David Feldman, who's been pushing to get the sport legalized for almost a decade.
We wanted it to be fast and exciting. So the fighters, they toe the line, they put their toe on the line. As soon as they say knuckle up, we can start banging. That's what's unique about this. And then what we also did is we developed rules like clinch fighting. So I can clinch you and punch.
Yeah, right.
So we're not just holding each other and the referee's gonna break it. As long as I'm punching, he's gonna let it go.
What would you say to critics who might say people would be willing to pay to see fights with weapons or a fight to the death? Like, just because people are willing to pay for it, doesn't mean you should give it to them, you know?
The hardest part about this was perception. It's barbaric, it's this, it's that. I pitched 28 states and they all said no. And I found one that said yes. I knew the fighters weren't really gonna get injured. You don't get as much head trauma, you don't get the brain rattle. I knew I wasn't doing something so crazy. I was just doing something outside the box a little bit.
To explain the business model.
We need about 40,000 pay-per-view buys and we need to sell the place out. We're already selling the place out and we look like we're gonna well exceed those 40,000 pay-per-view buys to break even. Bringing Paulie Malignaggi on was a big step for us. So we were getting a lot of curiosity fans.
And how big do you think it could be in 1, 2, 3 years' time?
I think within another year from now, we're gonna have a good TV deal. And I think 3 years from now, we're competing with everybody. If you come to it, you're gonna fall in love with it. Not only are you seeing the action, but you hear this. You hear that noise. You hear it, and it is, even me, promoting it, pushing it for years, and now promoting it, I'm like, man, it's awesome. It's just an awesome sound.
David is excited about the sound of bare knuckle boxing and the chance to make some of the millions of dollars people pay to watch combat sports. For Paulie, this fight gives him the chance to end his career on a high.
Wakey, wakey. Morning, champ. How we doing? Ready to go?
This is my breakfast. I'm sweating every little part of this. This stuff is like a fighter's best friend. It's called Alboline. And if you gotta make weight, Alboline is your best friend because Alboline opens your pores. It's usually used for women to wash off their makeup, I believe. I think anybody wants to be able to walk away from a sport with pride. I'm blessed and grateful that I have this chance to do this in this fight.
Introducing to you first, fighting out of the red corner, the Nightmare!
How's your fist, Paulie? That's the most important. You good so far? The key here in a street fight is when I land punches on you before you land punches on me, you always win the fight.
Fight fans of Tampa, this is scheduled for 5 2-minute rounds in the Bare Knuckle Super Welterweight division. What time is it? Tampa, Florida. It's time to knuckle
And speed, baby, and speed all day, all night. Let on your jab, Paulie. Let it go fast. Speed, baby. Work your jab. Down the middle, speed. Attaboy. Back on the jab. Let me go. How you feeling, champ? How's it looking in there? Good. You're looking really good. Back on your jab. Oh! There you go.
It's the last round. It's fucking desperate, you feel me? You know, you want this or you don't want it.
Cash him coming in! Come on, Cash him coming in! Back on the jab! Back on your jab! There you go! Work, baby! Work that stick! Yeah! How you feeling?
Broke my hand right here with the roof.
Okay.
By unanimous decision,
Are you serious? That's a bullshit decision. He won the fight.
The decision didn't go Paulie's way, but the promoter claims pay-per-view sales were between 120 and 180,000 buys, generating between $5 and $7 million in revenue. So it's a decent payday for everyone. And BKFC have already announced their next event.